Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it
Now, all right, y'all. Now, we gotta talk. We gotta talk. So let's talk about Juneteenth for a little bit, and then we're going to analyze and digest what the fuck is going on. So, Juneteenth. On June 19th, 1865, Union General Gordon Granger and troops went to Galveston, Texas to announce that the Civil War had ended and slaves had been freed. Approximately 250,000 enslaved people of Texas had no idea that they were free. So, they say that Juneteenth is the oldest known celebration honoring the end of slavery in the United States. But let's unpack that and get to the gist, the real, okay? Because there's some things they're not telling you about Juneteenth per usual. Because really, I don't want to talk about Juneteenth without talking about reparations. I don't want to talk about Juneteenth without talking about what came after the Civil War ended. You know, with Reconstruction and the black codes and the prison system. Like, provide the context. I'm going to provide it for you. And in between, I'm taking my sip of my drink because it's a lot going on, for real. For real. So Texans celebrated Juneteenth beginning in 1866 with parades, cookouts, prayers, gatherings, historical and cultural readings, and musical performances. Over time, communities have developed their own traditions. When people were freed in Texas, they wanted to get away from the South. They started migrating elsewhere. They started migrating from Texas. They took the Juneteenth holiday with them throughout the states. On January 1st, 1980, Juneteenth officially became a Texas state holiday. When I made this slide, Juneteenth was not a federal holiday, but now it is. And I have a problem with that because why is Juneteenth a federal holiday for government officials to have the day off and there's no reparations? The racial wealth gap still exists. The police can still come into this neighborhood and shoot and kill whoever they want. So why did you... I'm going to get to that. Anyway, just so we're clear. Now, it is a federal holiday. National holiday. Again, what did Malcolm X say? He said the white man will smooth you over with symbolic change and no justice is no real action. That is not word for word, but you get what I'm saying, and you know what Malcolm is saying. What is this supposed to do for us? Let's be very clear. Enslavement in the South ended slowly. Very slowly. And for me, I don't feel like slavery really ended. It just evolved into different forms. The chattel slavery ended, but the modern day slavery still exists. Anyway, enslavement in the South ended slowly after the end of the Civil War, and that signing of the proclamation, we have to analyze that to the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm proclaiming that this is a thing, but not enforcing the law, pretty much. The Emancipation Proclamation, quotation mark, freed slaves, but enslaved people in the South didn't get the news till later, During the Civil War, a lot of southern states seceded from the Union, so many plantation owners ignored the proclamation anyway, because they did not feel like they were part of the Union and they're not part of the U.S. Okay? The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. There's a reason why a great migration happened after slavery, quotation mark, ended in the South, because they had to get out of the South because they were going to be forced into something else. We'll discuss that. But again, analyze it. See, there it is. The language is right there. They're telling you that you are technically not free. You're advising free people to stay and remain quietly at their plantation homes and work for the same master who was enslaving them? And brutal? Okay, so again, when we think about the North and the South, when we think about Civil War history, the North, the Union is not nobody's savior either. There was slaves up in the North too. John Hancock, who signed the Declaration of Independence, was one of the largest slave owners in the North. Slavery did not come to an abrupt end in 1865, folks. Recreations of things like black codes, imprisonment, chain gang, sharecropping came immediately after the Civil War in the Deep South. So did the spread of increased racism, white supremacy. You got the Daughters of the Confederacy running around the South, revising Civil War history. You got the KKK. Those effects are still in the South today. They still remain. The majority of the black population in the United States is still located and highly concentrated in the South. Now, sharecropping. Sharecropping is a system of agriculture in which a landowner allows a tenant to use his land in return for a share of the crop produced on that land. So, you have to remember that the Southern economy relied heavily on agriculture. Majority of the freed people in the South were forced into sharecropping. In many regions, they were like, you have to be a sharecropper, and if you refuse this, we're going to lock you up. Sharecropping was exploitive and used as another way for white landowners to continue to use the labors of others to provide their wealth. It increased the amount of debt owed to the owners, okay? Laws favored landowners, plantation owners, the masters, so it made it difficult and illegal sometimes for sharecroppers to sell their crops to other people besides their landlord, and prevented sharecroppers from moving if they were in debt to their landowner. And of course, we have to remember, because what white supremacy does and what discrimination, racism, all that, many landowners did not split the profits fairly or at all with sharecroppers. So again, Fannie Lou Hamer worked on the field as a child along her parents in the mid-20th century. I want to remind you that the mid-20th century is like the 1920s, 30s. My fucking great-grandma was doing sharecropping work. When my dad was young, he was going down to North Carolina to help them do sharecropping work. My dad was born in 1972. Or was it one? He was born in 1970. He was 71. Either way, don't fucking matter. You see what I'm talking about? Do you see what I'm talking about? In 1865, okay? Those southern states, they had constitutional conventions. And of course, only white people were allowed to vote for delegates and vote on new state governments and constitutions. Remember that we have people who are mad because they lost the Civil War. They felt like their power was being stripped away from them. So, who do you think is in charge? Who is taking all these government positions? Who is making all these laws? Who's making all these different constitutions? The black codes were enacted to restrict the freedom of former slaves in the South. So again, white power still was in charge and at play here. It wasn't just no get free. Common themes of black codes were race was defined by blood. Employment was required of all freed men. Violators faced vagrancy charges. States required blacks to sign yearly labor contracts. If they refused, they risked being arrested, fined, and forced into unpaid labor. I thought slavery ended because what is unpaid labor? Exactly. Freedmen could not assemble without the presence of a white person. Remember when I talked to y'all about Gabriel's rebellion in my last video, and I said that they did not like when the blacks was assembling together because they were shook, because they were afraid that they were going to revolt. Freedmen were assumed to be agricultural workers, and their duties and hours were tightly regulated. So again, you are working on the farm. You are working in agriculture. You are not going to be an accountant or anything like that. Were there some? Sure, up in the north or whatever the case may be, but mainly you're going back to doing what you were doing before. You're just getting paid a little teeny bit for it. Freedmen were not to be taught to read or write because, again, if you were educated, you were taught what they don't want you to know, you will become aware of your condition and you will be ready to revolt and tear this shit up. I'm not lying. Public facilities were segregated. Violators of these laws were subject to being whipped, branded, and jailed. Again, maybe you have to rewind the video back a little bit and look at the black codes and then look at this. Because again, when slaves were freed in the Deep South, freed, quotation mark, they were shook again because they were like, they are going to try and get revenge. That is another reason why they made them black codes too. So remember, after Gabriel's rebellion, the fear of revolt increased and they strengthened the laws against enslaved people. Education of enslaved people was prohibited. You cannot gather in large groups, not allowed to go perform work for someone else other than their owner, depending on the area, all of that. Freed slaves in Virginia were required to leave the state within a certain amount of time or face re-enslavement. In this period after the Civil War, they're required to take the jobs given to them, and if they refuse, they'd be put right back in enslavement. 1865, the 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery, right? Quotation marks. For all people except those convicted of a crime, and that opened the door for mass criminalization, okay? Prisons were built in the South as backlash to that black Reconstruction, black people being freed. And they use that as a way to re-enslave black workers. In the South, extensive prison systems was developed in the interest of maintaining the racial and economic relationship of slavery. Currently, the United States has the most prisons in the world. We are number one for mass incarceration. Don't forget that, because the prison system's roots lie in enslavement. Who makes up most of the jails? Who's in there? Come on, y'all. Connect the dots. Think about it. Realize that here's a quote from Brian Stevenson in this article. I saved the articles. I save all of the links that I use on the internet or whatever. And I can send them to you if you'd like. Just message me, I guess. Hit me up on Twitter. Anyway. Let's analyze. There's a line from slavery through racial terrorism through segregation that is evident in what we see in our criminal justice system today. I'm persuaded that we really won't eliminate the problems of discrimination in the criminal justice system, in the education system, in the employment system until we change the narrative of racial difference that we have all accepted. These acts of humiliation and degradation created this desensitizing to victimization. We are indifferent to evidence of bias or discrimination. We are indifferent to innocent people being wrongly condemned on death row for 30 years. I think there is a historical root to that silence, and there is. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. Capitalism in America stems from slavery. Wall Street, slave trade. Still booming. Why is there a wealth gap in this country, huh? You can look at your history books. Well, no, actually you can't look at your history books because they be lying. Just come ask. We got to remember, y'all, most of the early presidents owned slaves. Capitalism in America stems from slavery. Rooted in slavery, the prison systems, the American police, some of these school institutions can be. Come on now. American history tends to thank Lincoln and the Union for fighting against the South because they wanted to end slavery, but we just got to remember that's just not true. That's just not true. Before, if you see my last video, you've seen this. You come and analyze this and let it sit and sink in. I just want to use examples. I'm always going back and forth. I hope you're able to connect these dots. Slave patrol, aka American police. Enforced curfew, check travelers' passes, catching and re-slaving free and enslaved people. Capture groups assembling without permission to prevent any form of resistance. Slave patrol. A brief analysis of key American social institutions mostly controlled by elite white men should convince us of the interlocking nature of race, class, and gender in structuring the institutional dimension of oppression. For example, if you are from an American college or university, is your campus a modern plantation? Who controls your university's political economy? Are elite white men overrepresented among the upper administrators and trustees controlling your university's finances and policies? Are elite white men being joined by growing numbers of elite white women, helpmates? What kinds of people are in your classrooms grooming the next generation who will occupy these and other decision-making positions? Who are the support staff that produce the mass mailings, order the supplies, fix the leaky pipes? Do African Americans, Hispanics, or any other people of color make up the invisible workers who feed you, clean your offices after everyone else has gone home? And there's nothing but facts in that. So again, we have not gotten very far in this country, and some of the representation we see is fake. And it's used to distract you and swindle you. We have work to do.